59 my parents stole my $60K college fund for my brother's fake startup. They didn't know I grew up to buy out their bankrupt company. Ladies and gentlemen, to the unbreakable legacy of sterling luxury auto, and to the brilliant new partners who recognize a flawless investment when they see one. My father, Richard, held his crystal champagne flute high in the air. His booming, charismatic voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings and imported chandeliers of the Grand Plaza Ballroom in downtown Manhattan. 200 of the city's most elite socialites, venture capitalists, and corporate executives lifted their glasses in unison, the soft clinking of crystal ringing out over the gentle melodies of a live string quartet. Standing perfectly still in the shadows of the heavy mahogany double doors, I watched him perform. My father had always been a master of the stage. Beside him stood my mother, Caroline, draped in heavy diamonds and wearing a practiced, pageantry smile. And right in the center of the spotlight was my older brother, Derek. The golden child was sweating through his custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, posing for society photographers with the arrogant, unearned smirk of a man who had never faced a single consequence in his 31 years of life. To the wealthy elites clapping in the audience, my family looked like untouchable American royalty. But I knew the rotting, desperate truth hidden beneath the floorboards. Their prestigious luxury car dealership was entirely bankrupt. For the past 3 years, my parents had been secretly hemorrhaging their corporate accounts to fund Derek's disastrous, fabricated tech startup. They were drowning in massive, catastrophic debt, mere days away from the bank completely seizing their assets and locking the doors of their showrooms forever. But tonight, they were throwing a lavish, 6-figure corporate gala to celebrate what they believed was their ultimate salvation. After weeks of begging and frantic negotiations, an aggressive, anonymous private equity firm had stepped in, agreeing to absorb their debt and offer a massive multi-million-dollar buyout. They thought they had survived. They thought they could sign the final paperwork on that stage in front of their wealthy peers, cement their status, and sweep Derek's catastrophic financial crimes under the rug forever. They had absolutely no idea that the anonymous CEO of that private equity firm was me. My name is Sarah. I am 28 years old, and I am the sole founder of Vanguard Acquisitions. But to the 3 people standing on that stage, soaking in the unearned applause, I was just the worthless, scapegoat daughter they had physically thrown out into a freezing winter storm exactly 8 years ago. It has been a challenging quarter for the luxury market, my father continued, lowering his voice into a tone of theatrical humility. But a true captain expands his fleet in the storm. Tonight, we officially announce our merger with Vanguard. And I must give special thanks to my brilliant son, Derek, whose incredible networking efforts helped bring this historic deal to the table. The ballroom erupted into enthusiastic cheers. Derek beamed, raising his glass to the crowd like a conquering hero. They were literally using my money, my empire, and my anonymous firm to elevate the golden child who had bankrupted them in the first place. I decided they had enjoyed the spotlight for long enough. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors wide open. I wasn't wearing the threadbare, second-hand winter coat they had thrown me out in. I was wearing a razor-sharp, tailored black power suit, my stiletto heels clicking methodically and echoing like a ticking clock against the imported marble floor. The sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer silk gowns naturally parted for me, the polite applause dying out into confused, hushed murmurs. As I walked straight down the center aisle toward the grand stage, my father's booming, charismatic smile instantly disintegrated. The blood completely rushed out of his face, leaving him a sickly, terrifying shade of pale gray. "Sarah!" My mother gasped into the microphone, the amplified sound of her shock ringing through the suddenly dead-silent ballroom. Derek's smug smile slid right off his face. "What the hell is she doing here?" he hissed, glaring at me. "Security, get her out of here." 2 massive security guards took a step forward, but I didn't stop. I simply raised a hand, and my lead attorney, who had been waiting near the front row, flashed his badge. The guards instantly backed down. I walked up the carpeted steps, completely ignoring my brother's panic. I stepped directly up to my father, my eyes locking onto his terrified, trembling gaze. I calmly reached out and pulled the microphone from his sweating hand. I turned to face the 200 wealthy elites staring at us. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice ringing out crystal clear and completely devoid of emotion. "My name is Sarah. For those of you who don't know me, I am Richard and Caroline's estranged daughter. I am also the sole founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Acquisitions." A collective, deafening gasp ripped through the room. A prominent bank executive in the second row dropped his champagne glass. It shattered against the marble, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot. My father physically stumbled backward. "No," he choked out, his voice a desperate, panicked whisper. "No, that's impossible. You have nothing." "My father just told you that my firm is bailing out his company," I continued, projecting my voice so it bounced off the vaulted ceilings. "But he is lying to you. Vanguard is not partnering with them. 8 years ago, my parents secretly drained my bank account, stealing my entire $60,000 college fund just to pay off Derek's catastrophic credit card debt. When I found out and begged for my money back, they threw me into a blizzard and told me I was dead to this family." Derek let out a horrified wheeze, backing away from the podium. "So, no, Richard, there is no strategic merger," I announced, my voice hardening into titanium. "I didn't buy your debt to save you. I bought your debt to collect. You are officially in default. I am formally announcing the total liquidation of your company, the immediate revocation of Derek's executive title, and I want you escorted off my property immediately." Before I reveal exactly how I built a massive financial empire in the shadows, exposed my parents' horrific theft to their entire social circle, and legally repossessed the golden child's perfect life, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I love seeing our incredible community from all over the world. Also, I have a serious question for you. What would you have done if your parents emptied your hard-earned life savings to save the sibling who ruined your life? Would you have sought revenge or simply walked away? Let's talk about it in the comments below. To understand how I could stand on a stage in front of 200 of Manhattan's elite, look my own flesh and blood in the eye, and coldly strip them of their entire life's work, I need to take you back exactly 8 years. I need to pull back the heavy, velvet curtain on the flawless, manicured illusion of the Sterling family and show you the suffocating, soul-crushing reality of what it actually meant to be their daughter. In our household, the dynamic wasn't just a subtle, unspoken preference. It was a loud, undeniable religion, and my older brother, Derek, was its undisputed deity. From the moment I was old enough to comprehend the concept of worth, the dividing line between Derek and me was violently clear. My parents, Richard and Caroline, operated a highly lucrative luxury auto group. We lived in a sprawling, pristine estate in the affluent suburbs of Westchester. Wealth, comfort, and opportunity were never an issue, unless, of course, those resources were being spent on me. Derek was 3 years older, boisterous, conventionally handsome, and possessed a manipulative, effortless charm that my parents completely worshipped. He was the legacy. He was the heir apparent they paraded around at country club mixers. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, observant afterthought. I was a girl who preferred complex financial modeling and mathematics to high society gossip. My parents didn't just overlook my independence, they actively resented it, viewing my lack of interest in their superficial world as a personal insult. The blatant financial favoritism crystallized into outright cruelty during my senior year of high school. Derek, who had barely scraped together a C average, announced he was going to a prestigious, out-of-state private university to major in business. For his high school graduation, my parents threw a massive catered party and surprised him with a brand-new $90,000 Porsche 911, complete with a giant red bow on the windshield. They paid his exorbitant out-of-state tuition in full, funded his luxury, frat house lifestyle, and handed him a platinum credit card with no limit. When my turn came, the rules of the house suddenly changed. I had worked tirelessly, securing a 4.0 GPA and earning an acceptance letter to one of the most prestigious university finance programs in the country, NYU Stern. I remember sitting at our polished marble kitchen island, proudly sliding my acceptance letter and the tuition breakdown toward my father. I wasn't asking for a luxury sports car or a fully funded penthouse. I simply asked if they could help me cover the first semester's tuition while I looked for a work-steady job on campus. Richard didn't even pick up the paper. He took a slow sip of his black coffee, looked me dead in the eye, and delivered a speech that would haunt me for years. "You're not throwing our hard-earned money away on a vanity degree, Sarah," my father said, his voice dripping with condescending finality. "Derek is building a network. He's an investment in this family's corporate legacy. You staring at spreadsheets all day is a dead end. You'll just end up a secretary somewhere. If you want to go to a fancy school, you need to learn the value of a dollar. You can enroll at the local community college and pay for it yourself. We are done handing out free rides." There had never been a free ride for me, but I swallowed the burning, humiliating lump in my throat and nodded. I withdrew my university acceptance the very next morning. While Derek was living a fully funded, delusional entrepreneurial fantasy in the city, swiping my father's platinum credit card for VIP table service, designer clothes, and luxury vacations under the guise of funding his tech startup, I was plunged into a grueling, bone-crushing grind. I enrolled in community college classes and took a job working back-to-back double shifts at a local 24-hour diner just to survive. My life became a suffocating loop of absolute exhaustion. I woke up at 4:00 a.m. to open the diner, smelling constantly of stale coffee, grease, and industrial bleach. My feet ached so badly by the end of my shifts that I would sit in my beat-up, second-hand Honda Civic and cry before driving to my evening accounting classes. I wore threadbare thrift store clothes and lived on day-old bagels and instant noodles. But through the blood, sweat, and absolute misery of those 3 years, I did something incredible. Every single tip, every overtime hour, every skipped meal went into a high-yield savings account. By the week of my 20th birthday, I had miraculously saved $60,000. It was enough to finally transfer to the university of my dreams. That money wasn't just a number on a screen, it was my literal blood. It was my freedom. Because I had opened the account when I was 16, my mother was legally required to be listed as a joint custodian, a minor administrative detail I had completely forgotten about. It was the fatal mistake that would destroy my life. The nightmare began on a Tuesday afternoon in late January, exactly 2 days before a massive winter nor'easter was scheduled to hit the coast. I was sitting at the diner during my break, buzzing with the quiet pride of finally starting my real life. I logged into my university portal, ready to pay my massive transfer deposit and secure my future. I pulled up my online banking app to verify the routing numbers. When the screen loaded, the air was violently sucked out of my lungs. Available balance, $12, $40. My hands started to shake violently. I frantically refreshed the page. I called the bank's automated line, my heart pounding so hard it hurt my ribs. The automated voice confirmed the horrifying truth at 8:00 a.m. That morning, an electronic wire transfer of $60,000 had been authorized by Caroline Sterling. Blind panic and a sickening primal dread washed over me. I sprinted out to my car and drove through the freezing rain back to my parents' estate, breaking every speed limit. I burst through the heavy front doors, my cheap winter coat plastered to my skin, my chest heaving with panicked breaths. I found them in the living room. My father was casually swirling a glass of scotch by the fireplace. My mother was sipping tea, and sitting on the plush velvet sofa, having driven up from the city for the week, was Derek. He was wearing a new $6,000 Rolex, casually scrolling through his phone as if the world revolved entirely around him. "Where is it?" I screamed, my voice cracking wildly as tears of pure, unadulterated betrayal streamed down my face. "Where is my money?" My mother flinched, but my father slowly set his scotch glass down. He looked up at me with an expression completely devoid of guilt. "Lower your voice in this house, Sarah," he commanded coldly. "You emptied my account." I sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at my mother. "That was my tuition. That was 3 years of my life. You stole $60,000 from me." Caroline sighed, adjusting her cashmere shawl with an annoyed click of her tongue. "Sarah, stop being so dramatic." Derek's tech startup hit a minor snag. He had some personal debts tied up in the business accounts, and the creditors were threatening to sue. "Your father and I had our assets temporarily tied up in the dealership's quarterly inventory, and we needed liquid capital immediately to keep his company afloat." I stared at her, completely paralyzed by the sheer, psychotic audacity of her justification. I turned to look at Derek, who was rolling his eyes. His tech startup. I choked out, the reality fracturing my mind. "He doesn't have a tech startup. It's a fake LLC he uses to write off his bar tabs and vacations. You ruined my life to pay off his credit cards. I scrubbed diner floors for 3 years. You buy him a Porsche, you pay his rent, you fund his entire delusional life, and when he maxes out his cards, you steal from me to fix it. Family helps family." My father yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "You are acting like a selfish, ungrateful child. Derek's career was on the line. You don't even have a real career. Your community college classes don't matter right now. We were going to pay it back eventually. You stole my identity and my life savings." I screamed back, the years of suppressed rage finally breaking through. "I am calling the police. I am calling the bank, and I am reporting you both for theft and wire fraud." The room fell deathly silent. Derek finally looked up, a flicker of actual fear crossing his face. My mother gasped, clutching her chest, but my father's face morphed into something entirely monstrous. The mask of the civilized, wealthy patriarch completely disintegrated. His eyes darkened with an explosive, venomous fury. He marched across the room, his heavy footsteps thudding against the hardwood. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm with a crushing, violent grip and dragged me toward the front foyer. "Dad, stop, you're hurting me." I cried out, struggling desperately against his grip. "You want to act like a hostile stranger in my home." He roared, dragging me past the grand staircase. "You want to threaten your own flesh and blood with prison over a technicality. You have always been a selfish, vindictive parasite, Sarah. You contribute absolutely nothing to this family's legacy but complaints and jealousy." He threw open the heavy front doors. The winter storm had intensified into a howling blizzard, the freezing wind and snow whipping violently into the entryway. With one final, brutal shove, he threw me out onto the concrete porch. I stumbled and fell hard onto my hands and knees, the icy snow instantly biting into my skin. A moment later, my cheap, canvas duffel bag was tossed out the door, landing in a snowdrift next to me. "You turn 20 tomorrow," my father sneered, standing in the doorway like a towering executioner. He looked down at me with absolutely zero parental affection. He looked at me the way one looks at a disease. "You are legally an adult. You want to call the cops, do it from the street. You are officially evicted. You are no longer my daughter, and you are dead to this family." He slammed the door shut. The heavy deadbolt engaged with a loud, final click. I sat on the freezing concrete porch in the middle of a howling blizzard, staring at the closed mahogany door. I had no apartment. I had $0 to my name. I had been entirely erased from my own family. They had completely sacrificed my existence, my literal blood and sweat, just to sweep their golden child's financial irresponsibility under the rug. But as I sat there, shivering uncontrollably as the snow began to bury my cheap coat, the hysterical panic slowly began to drain out of my body. It was replaced by something cold, heavy, and absolutely unbreakable. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought that without their money and their roof, I would simply vanish into obscurity, a necessary, silent casualty for Derek's continued success. They had absolutely no idea that throwing me into that blizzard was the exact moment the scapegoat died, and the architect of their total destruction was born. The first night after your own flesh and blood completely erases you is a very specific, paralyzing kind of cold. When the heavy mahogany door of my parents' Westchester estate slammed shut, sealing my fate and trapping my stolen $60,000 inside with them, I didn't have a cinematic breakdown. I didn't scream at the blizzard howling around me. I simply picked up my cheap canvas duffel bag from the snowdrift, walked 3 miles through the blinding, freezing storm, and climbed into my beat-up, second-hand Honda Civic. I had no bank account. I had no credit cards. I had exactly $14.60 in my wallet from my last diner shift. I drove blindly until I found a deserted strip mall parking lot on the edge of town. I killed the engine to save gas, curled into a tight ball in the backseat, and pulled my damp winter coat over my head. I shivered so violently that my teeth literally cracked. I was barely 20 years old, and my parents had just sacrificed my entire existence, my literal blood and sweat, to ensure my brother didn't have to face the consequences of his own financial incompetence. That was the exact night I met Evelyn. At 5:30 a.m., a sharp rap on my foggy car window jolted me awake. I sat up, terrified, expecting the police to cite me for loitering. Instead, peering through the glass was a 65-year-old woman holding a steaming cup of black coffee. Evelyn was the owner of the small, independent coffee shop at the end of the strip mall. But more importantly, before she retired to run a quiet cafe, Evelyn had been a cutthroat, highly successful corporate restructuring attorney in Manhattan. She had eyes that missed absolutely nothing and a heart encased in protective titanium. Evelyn didn't approach me with sad, pitying eyes or condescending apologies. She unlocked my car door, handed me the coffee, and looked at my soaking wet clothes and the thick financial accounting textbooks scattered across my passenger seat. "You look like you're calculating the exact velocity of your own rock bottom," Evelyn said, her voice dry as sandpaper. "Drink the coffee, and then come inside and grab a mop. I need a bookkeeper who isn't afraid of hard work, and you look like you need a paycheck." When my own parents looked at me, they saw a disposable liability. When Evelyn looked at me, she saw a terrifyingly sharp mind trapped in a desperate situation. She didn't just give me a hot meal. She gave me a small, uninsulated storage room above her cafe to sleep in and a lifeline. I took it, and I never looked back. What followed over the next 5 years was a punishing, relentless grind that pushed my mind and body to the absolute brink of human endurance. I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting a daily, silent war for my independence, desperate to prove that Richard and Caroline Sterling were wrong about me. My schedule was a suffocating loop of manual labor and intellectual obsession. I woke up at 3:30 a.m. every single day. From 4:00 a.m. to noon, I baked pastries, scrubbed the cafe floors, and managed Evelyn's inventory. From 1:00 p.m. to 10:00 p.m., I worked at a massive commercial logistics firm doing mind-numbing, high-volume data entry. I lived on a razor's edge of absolute poverty. I couldn't afford to replace the clothes in my duffel bag, so I wore the same 3 faded, oversized t-shirts in rotation until the collars frayed and the fabric grew dangerously thin. When the soles of my cheap sneakers began to detach, I lined them with cardboard and duct taped them back together just to keep the freezing warehouse floors from numbing my toes. I lived entirely on day-old cafe scones and bulk bags of rice. I didn't go to parties. I didn't date. I barely slept 4 hours a night, but I didn't let the physical misery consume me. I weaponized it. Every time my eyelids drooped at midnight, I pictured my father shoving me into the blizzard and my mother rolling her eyes as she stole my tuition. That memory was high-octane fuel. After the cafe closed, Evelyn and I would sit in a back booth until 2:00 a.m. While organizing her old legal files to make extra cash, I noticed glaring inefficiencies in how local commercial businesses were handling their debt restructuring. Evelyn recognized my obsessive genius. She became the loving, fiercely protective mentor my mother never was. She taught me how to read a corporate P&L statement like a crime scene, how to spot vulnerabilities in distressed companies, and how to negotiate with ruthless, emotionless precision. When I was 23, using a tiny pool of cash I had painfully scraped together from mopping floors, and a private loan Evelyn co-signed because she believed in me, I bought out the debt of my first distressed commercial logistics firm. The snowball effect was violent and magnificent. I utilized my background in finance to restructure failing businesses, stripping away their toxic liabilities and turning them into highly profitable assets. Within 3 years, I had flipped a dozen companies. By the time I was 26, I formally incorporated my own elite private equity and financial restructuring firm, Vanguard Acquisitions. By my 28th birthday, my firm was managing hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate assets. I was suddenly, quietly, staggeringly wealthy. One of my very first acts as CEO was buying Evelyn a stunning, paid-in-full, 10-acre vineyard estate in Napa Valley for her retirement. The woman who handed me a cup of coffee when I was freezing to death in a parking lot was now a multimillionaire by proxy. That is how you treat your chosen family. But despite my life-altering success, I made a strict, unyielding decision. My biological family could never, ever know I existed. I legally structured my entire empire through a labyrinth of anonymous LLCs, holding companies, and proxy boards. My name was completely scrubbed from all public corporate registries. To the outside world, the CEO of Vanguard Acquisitions was a faceless, untouchable corporate ghost. I kept my success entirely hidden because the digital ghosts of my past still haunted my periphery. Occasionally, I would check my brother Derek's public social media. It was a sickening parade of unearned luxury, Rolex watches, VIP club tables, and leased sports cars. He still claimed to be a tech startup founder, but Evelyn's rigorous financial training allowed me to see straight through the facade. I knew he was generating zero revenue, and I knew my parents were quietly bleeding their own luxury, Auto Group dry just to maintain his illusion of wealth. I knew exactly what would happen if my parents discovered that the selfish parasite they kicked into a storm was suddenly a Wall Street titan. The hands that had violently shoved me away would instantly turn into open palms. They would invoke the toxic bond of blood to demand I bail out their failing golden child once again. So, I chose to stay in the shadows. I wore bespoke, tailored suits in Manhattan boardrooms, yet remained a completely deleted file in my hometown. I found immense, grounding peace in my absolute silence. My self-worth was no longer tied to their approval. It was secured in my offshore accounts, my brilliant legal team, and the unbreakable titanium spine I had forged from their ultimate betrayal. I was completely safe. I was untouchable. Or so I thought, until my director of acquisitions walked into my corner office one afternoon, dropped a massive commercial bankruptcy portfolio on my mahogany desk, and told me that a supposedly prestigious luxury auto group in Westchester was begging Vanguard for a multi-million-dollar bailout buyout. I opened the heavy folder, saw my father's desperate, frantic signature on the bottom line of the application, and realized the universe had just hand-delivered me the ultimate opportunity for an absolute reckoning. Sterling Luxury Auto's merger gala was a glittering, six-figure monument to my parents' absolute delusion. From my vantage point, just outside the heavy mahogany double doors of the Grand Plaza Ballroom, I watched the spectacular lie unfold. Waiters in crisp white jackets floated seamlessly through the sea of guests, balancing silver trays of beluga caviar and pouring vintage Dom Perignon into crystal flutes. The room was packed with over 200 of Manhattan and Westchester's most elite figures, hedge fund managers, real estate tycoons, and prominent local politicians. They were all there to celebrate the survival of my parents' corporate empire. For the past 3 years, my parents had been secretly drowning. Their corporate accounts had been completely drained, bled dry to fund my brother Derek's fake tech startup. A fabricated LLC he used entirely to write off VIP bottle service, luxury penthouse leases, and first-class flights to Dubai. They had hidden their impending bankruptcy behind a wall of country club smiles and leased inventory. But tonight was supposed to be their ultimate victory lap. Vanguard Acquisitions, a notoriously aggressive private equity firm, had swooped in to absorb their catastrophic debt and offer a multi-million-dollar restructuring buyout. My parents had insisted on hosting this lavish, black-tie gala to publicly sign the paperwork. They wanted to prove to their high society peers that the Sterling family was still an untouchable titan of industry. At exactly 8:30 p.m., the live string quartet faded into a soft, elegant silence. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, drawing the crowd's attention to the grand stage at the center of the room. My father, Richard, stepped up to the podium, beaming under the warm glow of the imported chandeliers. He adjusted his bespoke velvet tuxedo jacket, raising a crystal flute of champagne. Beside him stood my mother, Caroline, wearing a practiced, pageantry smile, and Derek, the golden child, looking incredibly smug in a custom Tom Ford suit. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed friends," my father's booming, charismatic voice echoed through the silent ballroom. "Tonight is a monumental evening. As many of you know, the luxury auto market has faced turbulent waters recently, but a true captain doesn't just weather the storm, he expands his fleet." A polite, enthusiastic smattering of applause rippled through the room. I stood in the shadows, perfectly still, giving a subtle nod to my lead acquisitions attorney, Mr. Hayes, who was waiting quietly by the audio-visual booth. "Tonight, we officially announce our strategic merger with Vanguard Acquisitions," Richard declared proudly. "But I cannot stand up here and take all the credit for this historic deal. This partnership was brought to the table through the brilliant networking, modern business acumen, and tireless dedication of my son, Derek." The spotlight swung to illuminate my brother. Derek stepped forward, feigning a perfectly practiced look of modest surprise. He waved gracefully to the applauding crowd, leaning into the microphone. "Thank you, Dad," Derek said, his voice dripping with fake humility. "It just goes to show that when you build a strong entrepreneurial network and surround yourself with the right investors, anything is possible. Family is everything to us, and I am so incredibly proud to help secure the Sterling legacy for decades to come." The ballroom erupted into cheers. It was a masterclass in absolute narcissistic delusion. Not only were my parents lying to their investors about their firm being on the brink of total collapse, but they were explicitly giving Derek, the exact reason they were bankrupt, the credit for saving them. It was time to pull the plug. I gave my attorney the signal. He tapped his tablet. Instantly, the massive digital projection screens flanking the stage, which had been displaying the Sterling Luxury Auto logo, went completely pitch black. The microphone in Derek's hand let out a sharp, ear-piercing screech of feedback. The crowd flinched. The applause died instantly. Richard tapped his mic, looking confusedly toward the sound booths. "Just a minor technical difficulty. Folks, please bear with us." "There is no technical difficulty, Richard," my voice rang out, amplified by the wireless lapel microphone I had clipped to my blazer. The entire ballroom collectively gasped. 200 heads snapped toward the grand entryway. I stepped out of the shadows and pushed the heavy mahogany doors wide open. I was wearing a razor-sharp, tailored black power suit, my stiletto heels clicking rhythmically and authoritatively against the marble floor. The sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer silk gowns physically parted for me as I walked straight down the center aisle. On the stage, my father's charismatic smile instantly disintegrated. The blood completely rushed out of his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. My mother gripped the podium, her knuckles turning bone-white, while Derek froze, his arrogant smirk sliding right off his face. "Sarah," my mother gasped, the name carrying over the dead-silent room. My father's toxic survival instincts momentarily overrode his panic. He lunged toward the edge of the stage, his face twisting in fury. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed, keeping his voice low so only the front rows could hear. "Security, get this trespasser out of here immediately." I didn't stop. I walked right to the base of the stage steps. My lead attorney immediately stepped up beside me, holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio. I turned to face the 200 wealthy investors, bankers, and socialites. "Good evening." "My name is Sarah," I said, my voice leveled, cold, and completely unshakable. "For those of you who don't know me, I am Richard and Caroline's estranged daughter. I am also the sole founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Acquisitions." A shocked, violent murmur ripped through the crowd. In the second row, a prominent bank executive dropped his champagne flute. It shattered against the floor, but nobody even looked down. Derek physically took a step backward, his brow furrowing in deep, terrified confusion. My father just stood up here and told you a beautiful, inspiring story about family legacy. I continued, projecting my voice to the furthest corners of the room. He told you that his son, Derek, brokered a multi-million-dollar corporate partnership. But the truth is, Derek doesn't even know how to read a basic profit and loss statement. His tech startup has 0 employees and 0 revenue. He is simply the reason this company is completely bankrupt. Sarah, shut your mouth. My father pleaded, a desperate, hysterical edge ruining his commanding baritone. He looked out at his peers, his eyes wide with terror. She's lying. She's a disgruntled runaway. She has nothing to do with Vanguard. I know that you have been rejected by every major lender in this room, I said, cutting him off effortlessly. I pointed up to the massive projection screens. On cue, my AV team displayed the official, unredacted financial ledgers of Sterling Luxury Auto. The massive debt, the defaulted commercial loans, and the totally drained corporate accounts were broadcasted in 20-foot-tall numbers for every country club elite to see. Next to it, the screen flashed Derek's business expense reports, hundreds of thousands of dollars spent at nightclubs, luxury car leases, and 5-star resorts. Then, the slide changed one last time. Projected onto the wall was the original bank wire transfer from 8 years ago, showing $60,000 moving directly from my joint savings account into Derek's personal checking account, authorized by Caroline Sterling. 8 years ago, I announced to the silent, horrified crowd, my parents secretly drained my bank account. They stole my $60,000 college fund, money I saved by scrubbing diner floors for 3 years, just to pay off Derek's credit card debt. When I discovered the theft and begged for my life savings back, they threw me out into a freezing winter blizzard on my 20th birthday and told me I was dead to them. My mother covered her mouth, a strangled sob escaping her lips. Derek sank back against the stage backdrop, burying his face in his hands as the investors in the front row stared at the screens in absolute disgust. They thought I would freeze. They thought I would vanish under the weight of their betrayal, I said, my voice hardening into titanium. Instead, I built an empire. So, no, Richard, there is no strategic merger. Vanguard did not buy your debt to bail you out. We bought your debt because you are a massive liability, and I own it all. I turned fully to my father, who was trembling so violently he looked like he might collapse. The arrogant patriarch who had locked me out of my home in the snow was completely, publicly broken. Effective immediately, Sterling Luxury Auto is fully liquidated, I declared, handing the portfolio of foreclosure documents to my attorney, who placed them on the podium. You are formally terminated from the board. Derek's executive title is revoked, and I want you off my property by midnight. For 10 agonizing seconds, the Grand Plaza Ballroom was trapped in a vacuum of absolute, suffocating silence. 200 of Manhattan's most elite venture capitalists, socialites, and hedge fund managers stared unblinking at the 20-foot-tall projection screens. The unredacted image of my stolen $60,000 bank wire, authorized by my own mother, was displayed in high-definition glory right next to the horrifying ledgers of Derek's fabricated, money-hemorrhaging lifestyle. The pristine, untouchable facade of the Sterling family wasn't just cracking. It was detonating in real time. Then, the chaos erupted. The silence shattered into a deafening roar of overlapping gasps, furious whispers, and outright shouts of indignation. Camera flashes from smartphones began to light up the room as guests instinctively started recording the spectacular, high society downfall. On the stage, the golden child's illusion violently imploded. Derek's fiancée, a wealthy real estate heiress named Victoria who had been standing near the front row, marched up the steps of the stage. Her beautiful face, previously glowing with pride for her tech CEO partner, had morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. She looked at the projection screen, looked at my parents, and then looked down at Derek, who was hyperventilating in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. You told me your startup was finalizing a Series B funding round, Victoria said, her voice cutting through the clamor of the ballroom, loud enough for the front rows to hear. You told me you paid for my engagement ring with your own stock dividends. You're entirely broke. Your parents stole your sister's college fund to pay for your bottle service. Derek, the untouchable golden child, suddenly looked incredibly small. The arrogant, charming frat boy vanished, instantly replaced by a cornered, petulant fraud. He reached out with trembling hands, desperately trying to grab Victoria's arm to maintain his grip on his last remaining lifeline. "Victoria, babe, please, it's a misunderstanding." Derek stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine as sweat poured down his forehead. "It's just a temporary liquidity issue. My parents they just moved some funds around to help me out with a cash flow problem. I love you. We're supposed to close on our penthouse next week." Victoria didn't just pull away, she recoiled. In her world, a bad investment was a tragedy, but stealing from your own sister and lying about your entire existence was an unforgivable, radioactive crime. "Don't touch me," Victoria spat, her voice echoing with profound heartbreak and revulsion. She violently pulled the massive, 4-carat diamond ring off her finger and threw it directly at his chest. It bounced off his lapel and clattered against the wooden stage. "My father's attorneys will be contacting you in the morning to retrieve the wedding deposits. Do not ever contact me again." Victoria turned on her heel and marched straight down the stage steps. She walked past me without a word, pushing through the heavy mahogany doors and disappearing into the night. Derek let out a guttural, devastating sob. In less than 3 minutes, the golden child had lost his fake wealth, his stolen prestige, his unearned executive title, and the heiress who was supposed to be his ultimate safety net. He sank to the floor of the stage, burying his face in his hands, weeping loudly and messily. Down in the ballroom, the social exodus had already begun. The wealthy elites, sensing the catastrophic legal and financial fallout, were rushing toward the coat check. Investors who had golfed with my father for a decade were actively averting their eyes, putting physical distance between themselves and the epicenter of a fraudulent, bankrupt family. As the room rapidly emptied, the brutal reality of their complete destruction finally crashed over my parents. My mother, Caroline, scrambled across the stage, bypassing her weeping favorite son entirely, and practically threw herself at my feet. The heavy, leased diamond necklace around her throat looked more like a chain weighing her down. "Sarah, please." Caroline sobbed, her hands shaking violently as she reached out to grab the sleeve of my tailored suit. I took a deliberate, disgusted step back, refusing to let her touch me. My lead attorney immediately stepped between us, holding his briefcase like a shield. "Please, sweetie," my mother begged, real, hysterical tears ruining her expensive makeup. "You can't do this. We're your parents. We gave you life. If you liquidate the auto group, we will be completely destitute. We won't have anywhere to go. You have hundreds of millions of dollars. You don't need to destroy us." My father stumbled over to her, completely broken. The arrogant patriarch who had violently shoved me into a freezing nor'easter 8 years ago was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified shell of a man. He fell to his knees on the stage, right next to the podium he used to rule. "Sarah, I'm begging you," Richard choked out, tears spilling over his eyelashes, mixing with the cold sweat on his face. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I'll do anything. I'll give you all the remaining equity in the firm. We can fix this. Family helps family, right? Please find it in your heart to forgive us. Don't leave us on the street." I stood on the stage, looking down at the three of them, a weeping mother, a shattered father, and a ruined golden child. I felt absolutely no anger. I felt no pity. I just felt a profound, grounding sense of absolute titanium closure. 8 years ago, I began, my voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register meant only for them, I sat on the concrete porch of your estate. The snow was burying my coat. I begged you not to ruin my life over Derek's bar tabs. I told you I had nothing. Caroline flinched, squeezing her eyes shut. Richard looked at the floor, trembling, unable to meet my gaze. "Do you remember what you told me, Richard?" I asked. He didn't answer, just letting out a pathetic, shaking sob. So I answered for him. You told me that I was a vindictive parasite. You threw my duffel bag into a blizzard, and you told me I was dead to this family, I stated, repeating the exact words that had fueled my survival in that freezing storage closet. You threw me away because I was an inconvenience to Derek's delusions. Well, today, you are a massive inconvenience to my portfolio. I turned my back on them and looked at my security detail, who had quietly positioned themselves at the base of the stairs. You aren't my family, I said over my shoulder as I began to walk away. You are strangers who committed theft against my person, and you are currently trespassing on Vanguard property. I paused at the edge of the stage, looking back one final time. My attorneys will give you exactly 1 hour to clear out your executive offices. Anything left behind belongs to the bank, I commanded. And Richard, when you find yourself sitting in the cold tonight, wondering how you lost everything, remember that you built this storm yourself. I walked out of the ballroom and into the crisp, clear night air without looking back a single time. Behind me, the desperate, echoing sobs of my mother, the broken apologies of my father, and the pathetic wailing of my brother filled the empty room. They had expected a desperate, weeping 20-year-old to simply vanish into the snow. Instead, they had forged a ruthless CEO who returned to legally, methodically, and permanently take absolutely everything they had. The morning after I liquidated my parents' corporate empire and exposed my brother's fraudulent, manufactured life to 200 of their high society peers, I didn't wake up feeling a fiery, chaotic sense of triumphant vengeance. I didn't pop a bottle of vintage champagne, and I didn't throw a lavish party to celebrate the absolute destruction of their flawless public image. When I opened my eyes in my Manhattan penthouse, listening to the muffled, distant hum of the city far below, the only thing I felt was a profound, unshakable, and absolute quiet. It was the kind of deep, grounding peace you only experience when a lifelong, suffocating weight has finally been permanently lifted off your chest. For the first 20 years of my life, my central nervous system had been hardwired to anticipate the chaotic, conditional love of my family. I was deeply conditioned to brace for my father's cruel, belittling dismissals, my mother's manipulative gaslighting, and my brother's manufactured, expensive emergencies. Even during the 8 years I spent building my financial empire in the shadows, a tiny, subconscious part of me was always bracing for the moment they would find out and try to tear me back down. But as I sat on my balcony that Sunday morning, sipping black coffee and watching the sunrise over the skyline, there was absolutely nothing left to brace for. The monster wasn't hiding under the bed anymore. I had bought the house, evicted the monster, and changed the locks. Of course, a deeply narcissistic family structure doesn't just quietly accept defeat, pack up their ruined pride, and fade into the background. When the golden child is violently dethroned and the arrogant patriarch is stripped of his power and his property, they inevitably resort to the only tactic they have left in their arsenal: weaponized guilt. By Tuesday morning, the brutal reality of the fallout had fully set in for them. Victoria's wealthy real estate family had made good on their absolute rejection, completely blackballing the Sterling family from every major high society circle in Westchester. My parents' luxury, auto showrooms were padlocked by my asset managers. Their country club memberships were revoked, their personal credit lines were frozen solid, and the desperate, frantic attempts to breach my newly constructed walls began. My private cell phone number, a closely guarded secret I had kept hidden for nearly a decade, suddenly began blowing up with voicemails and text messages. They had clearly badgered my legal team and corporate receptionists until someone accidentally let it slip. First came the apologies from my mother. They weren't apologies for stealing my $60,000 college fund or throwing me out into a freezing nor'easter, of course. They were apologies for the unfortunate financial miscommunications of the past. Caroline left tearful, hysterical voicemails claiming that her blood pressure was dangerously high, that she was having heart palpitations, and that a mother and daughter should never be at war. She begged me to halt the liquidation, promising we could figure out a way to integrate you back into the family business as a true partner. Then came the barrage of texts from Derek. Stripped of his leased luxury cars, his real estate heiress fiancé, and his fake tech CEO persona, the golden child suddenly remembered he had a younger sister. His messages were a frantic, pathetic mix of bargaining and manipulation. "Sarah, I'm literally going to have to move into a motel," he texted on Wednesday afternoon. "Victoria left me. Her dad is suing us for the wedding and penthouse deposits we already spent. I have absolutely nothing. I know we had our differences when we were kids, but I'm your older brother. You have hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't just leave me to rot. Please drop the foreclosure. Let me come work for you at Vanguard. I can run your acquisitions department. I had to ride the public bus today, Sarah. Please." Finally, there were the flying monkeys, the extended aunts, uncles, and family friends who had gleefully ignored my existence for 8 years while praising Derek's fake success. They flooded my corporate inbox with long, preachy emails about the sanctity of family. They told me that I was being exceptionally cruel, that my father's legacy was destroyed, and that holding a grudge was toxic. "They are still your parents, Sarah," one aunt wrote. "You have to forgive them to truly heal. Blood is thicker than water." Society constantly conditions us to believe that biology dictates an infinite capacity for forgiveness. We are taught from a young age that being the bigger person means allowing toxic people back into our lives simply because they share our DNA. We are told that an apology, even a desperate, legally motivated one, demands immediate absolution. We are pressured to forgive and forget, to keep the peace, and to absorb the pain so the family unit can pretend it isn't rotting from the inside out. I completely, fundamentally reject that narrative. I didn't block their numbers immediately. I didn't yell, scream, or type out furious, emotional paragraphs defending my actions. Engaging with toxicity only gives it oxygen, and I refused to breathe life back into their dying empire. My anger was gone. What remained was pure, cold titanium. Instead of an emotional confrontation, I had my lead attorney draft a strict, legally binding cease and desist order. It outlined, in cold, sterile corporate language, that Richard, Caroline, and Derek Sterling were legally barred from contacting me, my employees, or any subsidiaries of Vanguard Acquisitions. Any attempt to bypass this boundary, whether by phone, email, or physical proximity, would result in immediate harassment charges. Furthermore, the document explicitly stated that if they attempted to contest the liquidation or contact me again, I would immediately hand over the original forged wire transfer documents to the district attorney and press full felony wire fraud and theft charges against my mother. I had a private courier deliver the documents directly to the front door of the cheap, cramped apartment they were currently renting month to month. I didn't forgive them. I don't believe that true healing requires conventional forgiveness, especially when the people who broke you are only sorry because they finally lost control over you. Setting a strict, unyielding boundary is not an act of malice, and it is not an act of revenge. It is an act of survival. I didn't owe my mother a reunion dinner. I didn't owe Derek an executive job at the company he tried to mock. And I certainly didn't owe my father a second chance to ruin my life. When the courier called my office to confirm the legal documents were delivered and signed for, a final, massive shift occurred within my psyche. For the first 20 years of my life, my entire identity was wrapped up in trying to prove my worth to Richard and Caroline. Every grueling early morning shift at the diner, every dollar I saved, every complex financial model I built in Evelyn's freezing storage room was initially driven by a subconscious, desperate hope that one day I would be rich enough, successful enough, and powerful enough for them to finally look at me and say, "We are proud of you." But as I sat in my corner office on the top floor of the Vanguard building, looking out over the city I had conquered, I realized something incredibly liberating. I didn't want their pride. Their validation was utterly worthless to me. They were incompetent, cruel, and morally bankrupt people. Why would I ever need a seat at their dining table when I owned the entire estate? Why would I want the approval of a father who calculated my worth based on my usefulness to his favorite child, or a mother who only loved the son she could brag about to her country club friends? My self-worth was no longer up for negotiation. It was forged in a freezing car in a strip mall parking lot, hammered into steel in the boardrooms of commercial finance, and polished by the unwavering love of Evelyn, the mentor who actually chose me. I am completely, undeniably whole, just as I am. The door to my past is not just closed, it has been permanently bricked over. They will spend the rest of their lives dealing with the consequences of their greed, downsizing their lives, and forcing their golden child to finally face the reality of his own actions. I won't be there to watch it happen, and I won't be there to catch them when they fall. I am finally, entirely free. Whenever the winter forecast calls for a severe blizzard, I don't feel that familiar, suffocating knot of panic tighten in my chest anymore. I don't brace myself for the biting cold. I don't instinctively pull my coat tighter around my shoulders, and I certainly don't look back at that icy concrete porch where I was left to freeze with a ruined future and a broken heart. Instead, I sit on the sun-drenched terrace of a beautiful, sprawling vineyard estate in Napa Valley, thousands of miles away from the snow. I sit there with Evelyn. We drink incredible wine, we pore over the latest corporate acquisition files for Vanguard, and we laugh. Evelyn doesn't share a single drop of my DNA. She wasn't there for my first steps, and her name isn't anywhere on my birth certificate. But she is my mother in every single way that actually matters. She is the woman who looked at a freezing, betrayed 20-year-old girl sleeping in a strip mall parking lot and saw a CEO. She gave me a safe place to land when the people who brought me into this world threw me away like trash, and in return, I bought her a sanctuary. That is what true family does. They invest in you when your bank account balance is zero, not just when you hold the power to bail out their multi-million-dollar mistakes. I am sharing this story with you today because I know exactly how agonizing it feels to carry the heavy, unearned label of the problem child, the scapegoat, or the disappointment. Society constantly bombards us with the deeply toxic narrative that family is an unbreakable, sacred bond. From the time we are children, we are conditioned to believe that blood is thicker than water. We are taught that we owe our parents our infinite patience, our unwavering loyalty, and our financial resources, simply because they provided us with the bare minimum of food and shelter. We are told that setting limits is somehow a selfish, unforgivable act, and that family helps family, even when that family is actively bleeding you dry and stealing your literal life savings. If you are watching this video, and you are currently shrinking yourself just to keep the peace in a toxic household, I need you to look at me and hear this clearly. You do not owe anyone your future just because they gave you your past. You do not owe your hard-earned success to a sibling who refuses to take accountability for their own life. You do not owe your sanity, your bank accounts, or your peace to parents who view you merely as a disposable human shield for their own financial crimes. And you certainly do not owe your forgiveness to people who are only apologizing because they finally realized they can no longer control or profit from you. My parents spent my entire life assigning a dollar amount to my existence. They thought that true loyalty meant staying silent while they robbed me blind to fund an illusion. But Evelyn taught me that true love is never a transaction. Setting strict, unyielding boundaries is not an act of malice. It is not a dramatic tantrum, and it is not an act of revenge. It is an act of sheer, uncompromising survival. You simply cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. Sometimes, the most empowering, beautiful, and necessary thing you can do for your own soul is to stand up, walk out the door, and let the heavy lock click completely shut behind you. The cold shock of that independence might terrify you at first. It might make you feel entirely alone in the blizzard. But I promise you, that storm will forge you into something absolutely unbreakable. You have the power to build your own table, to choose your own family, and to define your own net worth. And once you realize that your value isn't tied to their validation, you become completely, terrifyingly unstoppable. My biological family had to learn that lesson the hard way. Today, Derek is working a minimum wage retail job, having completely lost his heiress fiancée, his leased sports cars, and his pristine reputation. Richard and Caroline were forced to move into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment their social standing utterly annihilated by the public spectacle of the liquidation, and the looming threat of felony wire fraud charges if they ever try to contact me again. I don't wish them harm, but I also don't wish them well. I simply don't think about them at all. I am too busy living. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this journey. Reopening these dark chapters of my past wasn't easy, but keeping toxic family secrets hidden in the shadows only protects the people who put them there in the first place. If my story resonated with you, or if it reminded you of a situation you're currently fighting your way out of, I want you to know that you are not alone. Please go down to the comments section right now and share your story. The YouTube algorithm loves comments, but more importantly, this community needs to hear your voice. Tell me, what is the hardest boundary you've ever had to set with a toxic family member, and how did your life change after you finally walked away? I read every single comment, and sharing your absolute truth might be the exact push someone else needs to finally recognize their own self-worth and escape their own toxic situation. If this video helped you feel seen today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to support what we do here. And if you want more stories about reclaiming your power, surviving betrayal, and building your own chosen family, check the description box below. There's another video waiting for you that I know you'll connect with just as deeply. Until next time, remember to protect your peace, know your worth, and never let anyone hand you less than you deserve. I'll see you in the next one. The story ends here. Now, let's listen to some music to relax.